You're watching Double Standards with me, Afshin Rattansi. China's Vice President Xi Jinping has been in America, and it looks like the head of the CIA, General Petraeus, is arranging to go to Burma, Myanmar, right in China's backyard. We look at the ratcheting up of power games in the Jade Kingdom. Coming up in the show, Britain sends its nuclear submarine to the South Atlantic and ignores US calls for a negotiated settlement over the Malvinas. Disgraced Scotland Yard and Philadelphia police chiefs fly into Bahrain to advise on killing pro-democracy protesters. And as one of the world's most famous political prisoners, Aung San Suu Kyi, prepares for elections in Burma, Myanmar, we speak to her biographer, Justin Wintle, about the geostrategic battle between China and the West. Well, the United Kingdom has sent its heir to the throne and warship into the South Atlantic in a conflict with the United States. Remember, the United States Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said she wanted the British and Argentinian governments to come to the negotiating table over the energy-rich Malvinas.
We want very much to encourage both countries to sit down.
But the British government won't negotiate. Here is the Royal Navy's former First Sea Lord.
There's been a lot of silly rhetoric from the Argentine. They have been making the situation tenser. They have been applying effectively sanctions to the Falkland Islands for no real good reason. I think it is quite right that we take necessary measures to make sure we defend the islands, because the difference between now and 1982, when actually the islands weren't well defended, is that we can't take them back, because getting rid of our Harrier aircraft and aircraft carriers means we can't do that. Therefore, we have to defend them well, or else it's game over.
Game over, defend, war, and the US no longer recognizes UK sovereignty over the Malvinas.
Argentine Foreign Secretary Hector Timerman said the US government does not recognize the UK sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands. The US State Department has urged Britain and Argentina to engage in dialogue in order to reach the peaceful solution, but the US does not recognise UK sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands.
So now the UK is sending a nuclear sub to the Falklands, Malvinas Islands, and the UN is getting involved.
It was a new experience for me, said the UN chief after he was received by Argentine President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner at the presidential palace Casa Rosada. Where the Malvinas Islands was among topics high on the agenda. President Fernandez renewed the Argentine claim of sovereignty over the islands, calling on the United Nations in the presence of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to ask England to resume discussions with Argentina over the sovereignty of the South Atlantic archipelago.
So it looks like it's war. Even actor Sean Penn got in on the act.
I think that the world today is not going to tolerate any kind of ludicrous and archaic commitment to colonialist ideology, and yet there are clearly nuances of negotiations that have to be beneficial and understood between both parties.
In fact, the UN Special Committee on Decolonization says no fewer than 16 countries should be granted independence from their colonial masters. 10 of them are British colonies: the Malvinas, Bermuda, Montserrat, Gibraltar, and the Cayman Islands, to name but a few. The Cayman Islands.
ABC News has found that millions of dollars of Romney's personal wealth is in investment funds set up in the Cayman Islands, the notorious Caribbean tax haven where secrecy is the rule. Nothing in Romney's financial disclosure statements reveals his connection to the Caymans, but we tracked at least 12 of the funds he lists, set up by his former company, Bain Capital.
So there is no war, and David Cameron is helping rich Americans like Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney hide his millions in the Cayman Islands. No wonder Romney only pays around 14% tax. Look who else has the rum deal. Tony Blair appears in an advertisement for a chain of off-licenses in the Cayman Islands tax haven. He really gets everywhere, doesn't he? And what's his wife doing these days? Well, according to the Sunday Times of London, Cherie Blair is offering her services as a legal and human rights consultant to the Bahraini regime, which cracked down on protests last year. Blair, who visited the country in November, is promoting her services through Omnia Strategy, her consultancy. Other Middle East regimes facing the threat of revolution are being offered her services as an advisor on legal reforms. Great. Did she not learn anything from her war criminal husband's mistakes? We don't need to remind you of the devastating killing of civilians by the US-backed Bahraini regime, which now wants a NATO war on Syria, particularly in a week in which Bahrainis marked the first anniversary of protests at Pearl Roundabout in Manama. But who else is helping Bahrain's dictators? Former Metropolitan Police Chief John Yates, hired by Bahrain to reform force. Police chief who quit amid phone hacking scandal will overhaul Middle East's kingdom's force after critical report. Great, so the policeman associated with the Rupert Murdoch scandal and the hacking of murdered schoolgirls' phones is helping the Bahrainis. And who else? This man, John Timoney, former police commissioner of Philadelphia, who has a reputation for brutality and hatred of protesters of any kind. He says he is going to help the Bahraini regime in police matters. Well, he is famous for this brutal crackdown on demonstrators against the Free Trade Area of the Americas summit back in 2003. And he coordinated the brutal police response to the mass protests at the Republican National Convention in Philadelphia in 2000. Good to see Britain and the US exporting their finest police officers to Arab dictatorships. You know what else they're exporting around the world? Maybe the IAEA should be informed. Uranium. In 1991, the US sent showers of radioactive uranium over Iraq in Persian Gulf War I, over Yugoslavia in 1999, over Afghanistan in 2001, over Iraq in 2003, and over this nation in 2011.
Now, the US denies, doesn't it, using depleted uranium in Libya, and yet we've just heard war veterans in that report there claim that there is evidence showing its use by coalition forces in their airstrikes. To what extent do you think these accusations are true then tonight?
I'm almost certain that they're true. For instance, the A-10, which is the low-level standard attack plane that the United States uses, and the AC-130, which is a large airplane that fires 25 millimeter and 30 millimeter ammunition. Those are all depleted uranium.
How lucky is Syria that China and Russia vetoed that resolution of the UN Security Council? By now, Syria might have been covered in depleted uranium like Libya. Mind you, this is how the US looks after those brave men and women who were contaminated as they responded to the calamity of 9/11.
Firefighters who dealt with the agony and horror of 9/11 are now confronting a new battle. They're joining other emergency responders in the fight to get compensation and medical attention for the ailments they're facing after sifting through debris in the many months following the terrorist attack.
If you recall, there was a famous a photo op of the President of the United States who stood on a pile of debris at Ground Zero with his arm draped around the shoulder of a New York City firefighter. And he promised us that the federal government would stand behind us. I believed it, as all of our officers and firefighters and volunteers believed it, and yet it seems that there are certain elements in our federal government that would leave us behind, calling this program callously an entitlement program.
Entitlement program? With me in the studio is comedian David Mulholland, as per usual, and we're going to look at some of the cartoons from around the world.
Good to be back, Afshin.
Again, Europe.
Here we have, Atlas holding up the European economy, but in danger of slipping on the Greece spot, which is, of course, Greece, the Greek economy. Greece looks like it could unravel the European economy. There's some real problems with that. Right now there are negotiations going on, and there's a real question of how bad is it going to get in Greece.
What negotiations? Everyone knows the IMF, the EU, they just go in there and hold a gun to the bureaucrat, technocrat, Greek Papadopoulos man, isn't it? I mean, the people don't get a
Well,
say.
pretty much. Basically, Greece is going to default unless they get a bunch of bailout money, and the people who have the bailout money are saying, okay, you're going to have to do a lot of things Otherwise, we're not giving you the money. Now, if they don't get the money, they're going to have a messy default and drop out of the Eurozone.
Fantastic. Up with
so
the drachma.
Be the drachma again.
Yeah.
If they do implement them, well, then it's going to be disaster for the Greek economy. However, it won't be as bad a disaster as if they totally default and then go back to the drachma.
Do you think the IMF actually sits there going, well, how many people will die because of the austerity measures? What was it, 22% cuts in minimum wage?
Yes. What they're looking at is 22% cut in minimum wage and a 15% cut in pensions. And the Greeks are up in arms about this and saying, and this isn't even a democracy. Next cartoon here you have Mitt Romney, the presumed Republican frontrunner in the race for the Republican nomination.
What's it say?
It's saying, not concerned about very poor. I like firing people. Corporations are people. And here you have the elephant representing the Republicans saying, good grief, Mitt. You were born with a silver spoon and a silver foot in your mouth. And he keeps saying the wrong thing. He still seems to be the front runner.
Mitt Romney basically said he doesn't care about the very poor.
Yes, yeah. He also, and said, I like firing people. I mean, Mitt Romney keeps saying, look, I was a businessman. I know how to fix the economy. I was a businessman. Right. He was a vulture capitalist. What he did is he bought companies, fired everyone, and sold off the companies for their bits. That's how he made money.
What is this man of the people act? Anyway,
and also he's filthy rich.
And he only pays around 13.9% tax.
And that's a good segue into our next cartoon where it says, boss, lower tax rate. And then woman wearing a shirt saying, I am the 99%, higher tax rate. And a memo from the boss saying, memo, Miss Johnson, casual Fridays are cancelled until further notice. Sort of going on to the 99% and the Occupy movement. And it's really quite shocking what's going on. A lot of the movements have been closed down or have been ejected by police.
The media is saying Occupy is over. They're not even covering the Occupy movement.
I know,
it's
but
finished.
They've never really covered it, and it's not over. And here's the thing that they've been saying, the authorities who've been closing down the encampments, is they've been saying, well, you know, these encampments, they just attract homeless people with the associated drug and mental illness problems. Well, doesn't that say that the real problem is there isn't a system for dealing with the mentally ill and the homeless and those who have drug addiction problems, that they're not being taken care of? So anywhere they can find something that has a roof over their head, they're gravitating to? This is absolutely a scandal.
Okay, read this one next.
Yeah, American exceptionalism. I have two guys who are putting it up. So what's that mean exactly? We're number one. So it's not because we're the fattest nation, or take the most drugs, or watch the most TV, or have the highest divorce rate, the most rapes, the most murder, the most people in prison. Look, I just put up the signs. Pay the most for health care. This is going on with the U.S., especially amongst the Republicans. Is they're going, we're number one, we're number one, we're number one. We're never looking at other countries. They seem to think that if you look at another country and see what they're doing, if they're doing something a little bit better, maybe it should be examined. That would be somehow anti-American and evil and bad and socialist or whatever. And they're just entirely self-referential. And I think it's very, very interesting looking at the conservative right in the U.S. Because recently a study just came out about how conservatives are dumber than liberals.
I saw that. The Daily Mail, a right-wing newspaper here, printed
actually,
it.
A bunch of places covered it, not just the Daily Mail. It's shocking the Daily Mail covered it, because basically they're saying, hey, all of our readers, you're morons.
I didn't understand that one at all. Now we go to a very different story, because on foreign policy concerns, hot off the heels of Hillary Clinton insulting China and Russia for being terribly undemocratic by giving their votes at the UN Security Council, Hillary Clinton is great friends now with the Burmese junta.
Well, yes, well, she's going to visit. I mean, there's as far as I can tell out of Burma, what's happening right now is there's a big battle amongst the hardliners and the people who are trying to liberalize the country. And the hardliners keep going to their former leader, the military leader, and saying, oh, we can't do that. That would upset Fang Shui. And apparently it was the former leader, and Fang Shui, apparently very well placed. A lot like Feng Shui, somehow still influences events just by his existence.
Thank you very much, David, for coming back on the show.
Thank you, Afshin.
Well, the British government has long been opposing the government of Burma, Myanmar.
We have called for more international pressure across the world to put more pressure on the regime in Burma.
William Hague, the UK Foreign Secretary, a couple of years ago, and here he is in the past few weeks.
William Hague's first-hand experience of the Burmese Spring happening makes for painful viewing. Here he is in the gilded opulence of a palace in the brand-new capital, Naypyidaw. The president, an ex-general turned civilian, assuring him that the changes are not just cosmetic.
So he's friends again. Similarly, Hillary Clinton once said this.
We've seen rape used as a tactic of war before, in Bosnia, Burma, Sri Lanka, and elsewhere. In too many countries and in too many cases, the perpetrators of this violence are not punished.
Well, the threat that I always worry about first and foremost is the proliferation of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. Obviously we're very concerned about North Korea and recent reports about perhaps their dealings with what we call Burma.
Cut to today, and the United States is beginning to ease sanctions against Burma, Myanmar, which has been under military rule for 5 decades. A warning that there is flash photography in the next clip from the start. Ah, yes, here she is with the Myanmar president, Thein Sein. In fact, right now, the head of the CIA, General David Petraeus, is preparing to go there. Why now, one wonders, does this country, which has borders with China and India, suddenly attract so much attention from the USA? Well, to find out, we spoke to Justin Wintle, the biographer of one of Burma, Myanmar's most famous dissidents, the General Secretary of the National League for Democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi. Welcome, Justin Wintle, to Double Standards. The subject, Burma, which hasn't been in the news for decades, it seems like, and then all of a sudden, there it is in the headlines, the British Foreign Secretary, the US Secretary of State. What is happening in Burma and why is it particularly important geopolitically?
I think it gets in the news quite often. Those are two separate questions, of course, what is happening and its geopolitical importance. Let me go into the latter of those two. Situated between India and China. China's been very interested in it because building a pipeline up through Burma into Yunnan, which is a southwestern province of China.
Not something the United States likes very much.
Oil and gas. Now that means that to bring, say, oil in from Saudi Arabia considerably shortens the journey, and it's also a security thing, which is at the moment it has to be shipped through
the Malacca Strait.
The Malacca Strait, exactly. And that's a longer journey, and there's always the Malacca Strait can be switched off very, very quickly. So it's strategic. That is part of its strategic importance. The other part of its strategic importance is that it is resource rich. I mean, it's got gas fields and some oil. It's got a lot of tungsten, which is very important for making weapons, etc. So it is strategically important. It gets in the news, and the chief peg has been Aung San Suu Kyi. Now, and she's stood up to a very harsh military regime. She is a sort of human rights angel, if you like, and periodically, when something happens to her, when she goes under house arrest, when she's released from house arrest, when she makes a speech, something like that, there is news about Burma. In August last year, the new president, who's called Thein Sein, Thein Sein, who used to be a general but is now president, decided to meet Aung San Suu Kyi, who had recently been released from house arrest, and he is a reformist. And there are various things happening. They obviously want to open up the economy. They want to be less dependent on China, and the great fear was that they were becoming too dependent. They've been under a lot of pressure from ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which is a trading bloc, a bit like the EU. And Burma, Myanmar, we should really call it Myanmar these days, because that's what it's called in the United Nations, is due to chair ASEAN, of which it's a member, in 2014. And I think there's been a lot of pressure from other ASEAN countries like Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, etc., to clean up its act.
Well, what does reformist mean?
As we've seen over the last few weeks, nearly every political prisoner or prisoner of conscience has been released. The NLD, which is Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the National League for Democracy, is being allowed to stand in about 40... there are 40 by-elections for all the technical reasons at the beginning of April to the National Assembly. And they're being allowed to stand. Aung San Suu Kyi herself is being allowed to run as a candidate for a constituency in Yangon.
There were even rumours she might become a minister.
Well, We can get into that a bit later. So there is political reform there. Prisoners have been released. What is equally important is that the big story about Burma is that 40% of its population belongs to ethnic minorities. And there have been countless insurgencies. Historically, when the Burman people have been strong, you then get, they've tended to bigfoot the minority peoples, who include the Shan, the Karen, the Karenni, the Chin, the Kachin, and the Muslim Rohingya. When the majority Burman people have been weak, then the minorities have tended to express themselves. And the net effect of that was to empower the army, because only if the army was given more and more power could this insurgency, and there's also a communist insurgency, be kept at bay.
And China watching over this all the time.
That's a long... I can go back to that. But what that meant was that the army got stronger and stronger and stronger, so that the coup, when it happened in 1962 under General Ne Win, there was a logic to it, because the civilian government just couldn't cope with all these insurgencies. At that time, to answer your question, yes, China was covertly supporting a communist insurgency. Now, one of the great things that has happened in the last 6 months, is that whereas there were a number of these ethnic insurgency groups which had done a ceasefire with government, there were still some that had not. Notably, the Karen, and the Karen National Army has been waging a 6-year war, basically. And suddenly there's a ceasefire there. And there's only really one group now which there is no ceasefire war. But the tension between the majority Burman people and the minority people explains so much of Burma's not only recent history, but entire history. And that is, if these ceasefires hold, it's a massive step forward. What has to happen is that as the economy opens up, as sanctions which the European Union, Britain and America have imposed on Burma, as they're relaxed and I hope scrapped very quickly, and there's a big inflow of things, there've got to be real economic opportunities for the minority people, so that the minority people can feel that they are part of the new party, of the new happiness, as it were. And if that is done, then we're indeed talking about happy days for the next 10 years in Burma.
Well, there's always a danger of playing off big superpowers or blocs in this way. I know that, what did it say, daily average wages of $2.20 in Burma. When the British Foreign Secretary or the US Secretary of State visits Burma and trade delegations start to arrive as the sanctions go, how confident are you that the deals and contracts won't be sewn up at very low prices as a hedge against China when it comes to what the Burmese...
Well, I think if you look at Cambodia, for example, now Cambodia, I mean, the big industry there, and practically the only industry apart from some agriculture, is the garment industry. And there's some very well-known high street names like Marks and Spencer have garment factories there. And Cambodia doesn't really have any mineral resources to speak of. Burma is a very different thing. They've got a huge amount of mineral resources, they've got a bigger population, a more varied population, etc. Of course, there will be Western companies which will seek to exploit a cheap labour force.
I mean, do you see it as part of the non-aligned movement, or do you see it as changing very much towards the West? I mean, it's the bipolarity here that diplomats... I don't know, behind you in MI5 or further down the river at MI6 are thinking. It is that bipolarity. Exactly, exactly.
The leaders in Myanmar are very busy making up their minds, and they want to be the sort of newest dragon economy on the block. And good luck to them.
Thank you very much for coming on the show, Justin, and we'll put a link to your book, the biography of Aung San Suu Kyi, on our website.
My pleasure as always.
That's it for this week. You can email us at comment@doublestandardstv.com. Well, we may be banned in the United Kingdom. Also banned is the very word, Palestine. The BBC Trust Editorial Standards Committee has ruled that the BBC was right to bleep out the word Palestine in a performance by the rapper Mike Righteous on a music show. They said that as this was a music programme, there would have been little expectation from the audience that matters of political controversy would be aired. Obviously, the BBC broadcasting music that entertains British troops at Camp Bastion in Afghanistan is just not political. Luckily, we are banned anyway, so here's an apolitical song by Loki. See you next week.
Not every Zionist is Jewish, and not every Jew is a Zionist.
This is for Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. It's about time we globalise the intifada. Listen close, I've got 6 words for Obama. Long live Palestine, long live Gaza. Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. It's about time we globalise the intifada. Listen close, I've got 6 words for Obama. Long live Palestine, long live Gaza.
The government supports the people of the UK didn't. Zionism's not compatible with Judaism. The hijacked faith, the state is misrepresenting Israel equals displacement and ethnic cleansing. I know I'm on a list for being more verbal. Curse every Zionist since Theodore Herzl. Balfour was not a wise man. Shame on Rothschild. Between them the monster they created has gone wild.
العدو انحصر من اخون غدر. انتوا بتشعروش بالبطولة لو حذفكم بحجر. الانسحاب من العراق مثل جراد. فات جم خراب غاب فيش عقاب. كم من